Hare Krishna, Gauranga. Just going to be doing another 30 key verses of the Bhagavad Gita. We're now into chapter 7, entitled Knowledge of the Absolute. And we'll be looking to break this first verse down, 7.1. Quite a bit of a long purport, so I'll probably try to move quite quickly. Again, this is the introduction to the Bhagavad Gita and the 30 key verses. So please, of course, go deeper into these topics, and especially this chapter has a lot of amazing shlokas. There's also a reference in this purport that talks about a few of the verses later on that are not covered in the 30 key verses. So again, I'll touch on them just to highlight them, and then you can obviously please go off and read them further. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So this is 7.1 Bhagavad Gita. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Maya Shakta Manapartha Yogam Yunjadmadashraya Asamsayam Samagram Mam Yatha Ginashasi Tashvanu. The Supreme Person of Godhead said, "Now hear of Son of Prita, how by practicing yoga and full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free from doubt." Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharani Nirvishesha Shunyabari Pashachadi Satani Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. In this 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the nature of Krishna consciousness is fully described. Krishna is full in all opulences, and how he manifests such opulences is described herein. Also, 4 kinds of fortunate people who become attached to Krishna, and 4 kinds of unfortunate people who never take to Krishna are described in this chapter. So, to jump off here into 7.15, this is the 4 unfortunate peoples who miss Krishna consciousness. Namam duskritino mudha prapadyanti naradama mayaya parta jnana asurim bhavam ashritaha. Those miscreants who are grossly foolish, who are lowest among mankind, whose knowledge is stolen by illusion, and who partake of the atheistic nature of demons, do not surrender unto me. So Srila Prabhupada breaks this down in a bit more detail, which could obviously be a whole class in its own right. But essentially the 4 kinds are grossly foolish, lowest among mankind, stolen by illusion, and partaking of atheism, basically. Grossly foolish is a sign of Kali Yuga. People are so foolish, they just, no matter what happens to us in, this material nature, we're suffering so much, we actually think there's enjoyment there in that, and, pleasure and pain in that sense. This puts us into being the lowest of mankind, this mode of ignorance person. And when we look back to these verses on lust, that when lust leads to that desire being unfulfilled, leads to wrath and anger, it then leads to your bewilderment and illusion of memory. This knowledge is stolen by illusion, so you have no knowledge of higher purpose in life, knowledge of higher authority, knowledge of spiritual nature. So essentially speaking, all you've got is to relish the suffering of the material world, and of course they don't believe in God anyway. And even though there's so many indications to show that there is a Supreme Personality of Godhead, their philosophy is so deeply entrenched in this concept of there being no God, no Supreme, so they're completely and utterly lost. The second verse comes after this one, 7.16, and it speaks about the 4 fortunate people. "O best among the Bhartas, 4 kinds of pious men begin to render devotional service unto me. The distressed," the first one, "the desire of wealth, the inquisitive, and he who is searching for knowledge of the Absolute." So the first one is quite an obvious one, in the sense that when you actually, if you have any intelligence or you have some pious tendencies, then when you become distressed, unlike the foolish or ignorant person, the grossly foolish person who have no clue and no hope, the distressed person with a little bit of purity and intelligence, he can actually then say, okay, look, I'm getting smashed here in this material world. Where's my shelter? What am I going to do? And he starts then inquiring, he starts looking. you know. So he becomes inquisitive. And so those two are kind of very similar. They're looking and they're thinking there's got to be a source to all this in front of me, this material world that I'm stuck in, just revolving around in different modes of nature, different conditions of life, you know. There's got to be some answer to this. And then obviously the searcher for knowledge of the absolute. That's the highest part. Then you've looked at different pursuits, you've inquired and you've prayed and asked and, you know, tried everything that you can, and then you start saying, okay, where's the spiritual nature? And then you start getting into Krishna consciousness and you really start searching. That's when it begins. And then the other one, the desire of wealth, is quite a subtle one, in the sense that we obviously think that if once we know there's a God, or we start to get a bit more into the concept of there being a supreme, then getting linked up to him, or, you know, getting hooked up with the big man, means that there must be some power there, some wealth, some benefits, you know. So those kind of people are looking to get something out of the association with God. In the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, the living entity has been described as non-material spirit soul, capable of elevating himself to self-realization by different types of yogas. At the end of the 6th chapter, it has been clearly stated that the steady concentration of the mind upon Krishna, or in other words, Krishna consciousness, is the highest form of all yoga. So, it's saying here, in the last chapter, chapter 6, it's all about the mind, controlling the mind. Now Arjuna comes to Krishna with this idea that you can't control the mind. Chanchalam hi mana Krishna pramati balavadridam tashyaham nigraham manye vayur eva saduskaram. That the mind is more difficult to control than the wind, Krishna, he says. Krishna says, yeah, it is, but it's possible by suitable practice and detachment. And he also says that, Yato nischalati manas chanchalam astaram tatastatona yamyata ratmaniva vasamnayet. That from wherever the mind wanders, due to its flickering and unsteady nature, one must certainly withdraw it and bring it back under the control of the self. So we've discussed that we're not the material body, we're the soul. So the real self, bring it back under the control of the real self in Krishna consciousness. And then he says, in this suitable detachment is that one who is regulating his habits of eating, sleeping, recreation and work can mitigate the material pains. Yukta hara viharasya, yukta chestasya karmasu, yukta swapna vibodasya, yogo bhavati dukkha. Right? Becoming balanced in your program is Krishna consciousness. And it says, by concentrating one's mind upon Krishna, one is able to know the absolute truth completely, but not otherwise. So without this practice of Krishna consciousness, with that sense control, there's no knowing the Supreme. Impersonal Brahma Jyoti, or localized Paramatma realization, is not perfect knowledge of the absolute truth because it is partial. So these two processes are there. First you go through the Brahman realization, then the Paramatma, then the Bhagavan. So you understand that there's an energy of everything. The universe is an energy. There's energy within us. There's energy motivating and moving everything around us, you know. And then you say, okay, let's go a little bit deeper. You start getting into some meditation process, some spiritual soul searching. And then you realize that, okay, that Supreme Authority, his energy is in all of us, because we're parts and parcels of that Supreme. This is the first parts of the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, chapter 3, you know. And then, who is that person? Bhagavan, a supreme person. Prabhupada said that in a lecture. He says, Bhagavan ultimately means that the Krishna is a supreme person. This is the meaning of the word Bhagavan, you know, that God is a person. Full and scientific knowledge is Krishna, and everything is revealed to the person in Krishna consciousness. In complete Krishna consciousness, one knows that Krishna is ultimate knowledge beyond any doubt. Different types of yoga are only stepping stones in the path of Krishna consciousness. So we know that there's different types of yogas out there, whether it's Hatha Yoga, you know, or it's Kriya Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, right? Doing some bodily exercises, some breathing exercises, you know, some meditative states, some, you know, fruitive activities, some intelligent search. But then ultimately Bhakti Yoga is that platform that we're looking for. And on Bhakti Yoga, then that allows us to go further and deeper into a Krishna conscious platform. one who takes directly to Krishna consciousness automatically knows about the Brahmajyoti and the Paramatma in full. So if you already are on the level of advanced mathematics, you already know about 1 equals 1, 1 plus 1 equals 2, or your multiplication tables, so on and so forth. You've already understood all that. That's already there, And then we say that when one comes to chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra and practicing Krishna consciousness, it means you've been through everything else. So we don't need to look back to what we had previously or what we think we've missed. We've already done all those processes throughout these previous bodies and previous lives, as I spoke about in the other class just recently there. We've picked up all those material bodies. We've been through so many different, whether we've been rich, poor, we've been famous, we've been infamous, we've been animals, we've been in different planets in different conditions. We've done it. Now we've come into this human platform life again after such a long time, and now Krishna consciousness is there in front of us to grasp and to hold on to it. Don't let it slide away. By practice of Krishna consciousness yoga, one can know everything in full, namely the absolute truth, the living entities, the material nature, and their manifestations with paraphernalia. So knowing Krishna is not just knowing the Supreme Person of Godhead, it's everything that comes with him, his energies, his material and his spiritual nature. One should therefore begin yoga practice as directed in the last verse of the 6th chapter. Concentration of the mind upon Krishna, the Supreme, is made possible by prescribed devotional service in 9 different forms, of which Shravanam is the first and most important. So it says Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dashyam, Sakyam, Atmanivedanam. So it's saying hearing, chanting, remembering, doing daily worship, offering to the lotus feet of the Lord, and ultimately Atmanivedanam is full surrender. Everything you've got, mind, body and words, surrendering to Krishna. But this first thing, Shravanam, is the most important. The Lord therefore says to Arjuna, Tashranu, or hear from me. No one can be a greater authority than Krishna. Prabhupada made this point several times in the previous purports. So hearing is the thing. Because hearing gives you that opportunity to then remember. You can't remember if you don't hear. So you hear, and then you get that essence, and you start to remember these pastimes, remember these wonderful shlokas, remember about who Krishna is, and remember who you are. Comes an awakening, comes this mood of, oh my God, I am actually a part and parcel of Krishna. I do remember that he is the Supreme Person of Godhead, and this is the process to do. There's a famous story. I think it was probably a book, but it was a movie anyway, where Robin Williams and Robert De Niro, and called Awakenings. And basically the man had been in a coma for so many years, like some 20 years, and then he came out of it. Some medicine was found, he came out, and he was just going around, and he couldn't believe what state the world was in, and so on and so forth. This is us coming out of the material world and into Krishna consciousness again for that first time. It's so special, so incredible, so we just have to hear, and then we can remember who Krishna is actually, because it is our rightful position in life. It's the soul's dharma, it's the soul's nature. One has therefore to learn from Krishna directly, or from a pure devotee of Krishna, and not from a non-devotee upstart puffed up with academic education. So this goes back to this surrendering to the spiritual master as the representative of Krishna, bona fide via medium. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, this process of understanding Krishna, the Supreme Person of Godhead, the Absolute Truth, is described in the 2nd chapter of the 1st canto as follows. Some very nice and famous shlokas here, some of which are quite regularly used in Bhagavatam classes and so on and so forth. Shrinvatam swakata Krishna punya shravana kirtanaha hridyantastohya badrani vidunoti suhritsatam nashta prayeshva badreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya Bhagavad Yutama Shloki Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki Tadara Justamo Bhavaha Kamalobadayaschaye Cheta Etair Anhavidam Stitam Sadve Prasidati Evam Prashana Manasho Bhagavad Bhakti Yogataha Bhagavad Tattva Vijnanam Mukta Sangasya Jayate Vidyate Hridaya Grantis Chidyanti Sarva Samsayaha Krishanti Chasya Karmani Drishta Evat Manishware. To hear about Krishna from Vedic literatures or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita is itself righteous activity. And for one who hears about Krishna, Lord Krishna, who is dwelling in everyone's heart, acts as a best wishing friend and purifies a devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him. In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge. As he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam and from the devotees, he becomes fixed in the devotional service of the Lord. By development of devotional service, one becomes freed from the modes of passion and ignorance, and thus material lusts and avarice are diminished. When these impurities are wiped away, the candidate remains steady in his position of pure goodness, becomes enlivened by devotional service, and understands the science of God perfectly. Thus, Bhakti Yoga severs the hard knot of material affection and enables one to come at once to the stage of Asamsayam Samagram, understanding of the Supreme Absolute Truth, Personality of Godhead. And this was the Bhagavatam 1, 2, 17 to 21. Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotee in Krishna consciousness can one understand the science of Krishna. So that was Prabhupada's end. Prabhupada himself, when he came on the boat, he made a prayer called Markini Bhagavat Dharma. And this was one of the things that he took that whole set of shlokas, that whole excerpt, and that was part of his prayer, you know. I don't know, he's one of the kind of, I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically says that I don't have any knowledge, I don't have any potency, but I have faith in the words of Krishna, you know. By bringing these books here, you know, they'll do everything, Krishna, you know, make me a puppet, make me dance as you like, you know, guide me and empower me to have the intelligence to speak to these people, you know. This was Prabhupada's mood. So these verses, you know, only by hearing from Krishna, by reading Bhagavad Gita, hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam, or, you know, or of course alongside that, because you would also see Srila Prabhupada's purports, hear from one of the pure devotees in Krishna consciousness, you know, and then understand the science of Krishna consciousness, you know, because it is a science. It's not a religion, it's not a cult, it's not a practice, it's not a ism or schism, you know, it's a science. We can practically see that change, you know, that hard heart being melted away through love of God, you know. So I'll stop there, and Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Nittai Gaura Premanandi Hari Hari Bol.